All right, I think we'll get started with our part two here. I'm happy to introduce Sandeep Akkaraju.
Hello.
And I might have mentioned it before, but on the first day, we one of the sort of like the get to know you session in the morning where we talked about where people are from. Folks have written their companies and different places they've lived up on this board over here. And we were talking about like meeting people at the soccer field. And I was like, oh, I met Sandeep at the playground while our daughters were playing, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, maybe?
Yeah.
And we happen to live just down the street from each other, and we kind of got talking about the industry, and like, oh, we work in the same kind of industry, same kind of space. So excited to have an opportunity to work with you professionally, as well as, with the...
Likewise, and thank you for inviting me here.
Yeah.
Excited to be here to see everybody. And, again, I mean, being an entrepreneur, there's nothing like getting energy from other people, either in entrepreneurial pursuits or planning entrepreneurial pursuits.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just as a starting point, you could just kind of give you an overview, introduction of where you are and a little bit about the technology that we're working on today.
Sure. I'm Sandeep Akkaraju, CEO, co-founder of a company called Echo Imaging. We're based in Redwood City, California. And we started the company about 5 years ago, really it was sparked by, again, this is my fourth startup, and really, before I talk about my current startup, I think one of the things we had talked about is kind of giving you a little context of how I got to here.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, there's no grand plan, but it's more of connecting the dots backward and trying to kind of, make a picture out of it. And so maybe it's and really all of the startups that I've been involved with have been about one thing in perspective. How do you take a combination of nanotechnology, semiconductors, signal processing, software, and the thing about this latest company, of course, is AI, to fundamentally change the economic value proposition of an industry. So kind of, figured out that it's a sucker's game if you kind of try and take on the incumbents head on, right?
Yeah.
You've got to kind of find a way where you're playing completely orthogonal to what the incumbents are doing, okay? When they zig, you have to zag. And to be able to do that, really, I started off my career up here in Boston, early 90s, with a company called IIsa. This was early days of, we wrote a whole bunch of DARPA grants and NIH grants and NSF grants at that point to kind of get this company off the ground. It was a little MIT startup. And this is the early days of nanotechnology and MEMS and in the Boston area. And I think it was 94. We were like, hey, this internet thing is going to be huge one day, right? So, and we said at that point, the problem was switching technologies on the internet, right? $1 million a channel, okay? And on the metro line, today you'd be lucky to get $2, right? And that's kind of the power of technology to completely disrupt that. Okay, again, it was just to a certain degree leap of faith because nobody knew how big this internet thing was going to be, but we were like, and this is kind of before really, there was a lot of venture capital funding, right? This is pre-dot-com, okay, when we started off all of this. And really, so we built that company the old-fashioned way, really on government funds and leveraging, parlaying one success to another. And the company was acquired by Corning in 2000 for about $750 million. So after that, I spent a couple of years backpacking and decided to buy the company back. Corning was like, hey, do you want to buy your company back? And said, okay, well, and ran that, and one of my partners took, and we refocused the company on the Chinese markets, okay, and one of my partners took that company over. Did another startup in between where we were kind of, looking at exactly what, this was blood analysis, okay, similar to Theranos, but after a year, I was like, boy, this is a tough problem, and you need to know when to fold your cards, and I'm glad I folded my cards then. We got parts of the technology working, but really the sample prep and everything else was just, when we looked at it, we were like, hey, this is going to be tough. So when we saw Theranos, we're like, whoa, good for them. That solved an incredibly hard problem.
Did
because,
it?
or didn't,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it was just kind of, I was like, woo, somebody's, the signal to noise ratio was just kind of,
Yeah.
We felt was just impossible to solve. So when somebody said they did, we were like, whoa. Okay, what's the breakthrough, right? And clearly there was no skepticism in me because I knew somebody would maybe crack it.
Right,
okay,
right.
but
Good faith.
yeah, but 2006 we kind of saw the whole, the Nintendo Wii had come out, and we were like, hey, how cool would it be to take this and put this into mobile phones? At that point, the iPhone hadn't even launched, right? So we were kind of, we saw these nascent technologies like GPS and other things coming in, and we said, hey, it'd be really interesting to develop technologies that took all of the motion sensing and put it onto a chip, okay? And to combine it with all of the sensor fusion software to make it really simple. And I remember kind of, pitching this to Nokia, and, great companies like Nokia and Research in Motion, and they'd like, I don't know why we would ever buy your chips, right? And why would we ever put this into?
Yeah.
And fast forward 4 years later, you're getting calls from Nokia and saying, hey, yeah, we want to put a chip in our phone, and the only reason is this crazy California company put one. Okay, so it's just kind of interesting in terms of this, when you're kind of ahead into the future and where things are at. For the incumbents, these technologies look like pie in the sky. Or okay, I remember kind of talking to Research in Motion, made BlackBerry, of course, and it was just kind of fascinating in those days where they just didn't get it, right? And until it was too late.
Yeah, I don't think they ever got it right.
Yeah.
They ended up not
And
really surviving.
yeah, so and all of those technologies today, if you look at gyroscopes and motion sensing technologies, were about yay big, $100,000. Today it's under $1 in your wristwatch. Okay, so really, Echo, when we founded Echo, it was really kind of, we saw what was happening around the valley. All of a sudden, the valley was kind of, really about creating, maybe a little bit of a tech utopia, right? Back in the, about idealism, about building great technologies, okay? But it had kind of, you got into the age of ad tracking and search revenues and clickbaits and, and everything else that kind of led to today, right? Whether it was, and we felt like we needed to get back to the roots of doing something fundamentally different, fundamentally important. And I think it was 2001, in 2000 timeframe, I was kind of, spent a lot of time backpacking in West Africa. And it was pretty clear that, there were so many technologies. I was in Mali, and one of the big problems in Mali was river blindness, okay? And there were kind of, medicines available in the West for river blindness, right? And they were typically veterinary medicines and would not kind of go out into a place. So it became very evident that, in a way, the future was already there for those people suffering, but it was not evenly distributed, right? So the key thing behind what we are trying to do is, we looked at medical imaging, okay? A huge modality, right? And it's not affordable. 75 to 80% of the world has zero access to any medical imaging. So, part of it is how do we kind of, make that disparity kind of, make that more equitable, right? I mean, how do you kind of, really take that and make it more evenly distributed, okay? So we started Echo and said, hey, could we disrupt the medical imaging market in a big way, where we could take, some of the highest end technologies and put it onto a chip, okay? And really put it into the pockets of caregivers rather than patient going to the machine. This is now just like a device in your pocket that gives you an unprecedented window into the human body, okay? So that's kind of, really how we started off with Echo is, we've received our FDA clearances, and we are waiting for some of the supply crunches to clear up. Should be pulling one out of my pocket and showing you, but I've been advised by my marketing team not to do that. But
Yeah,
I'm super excited.
Tell me a little about the like the form of it, like the what you get.
Sure.
And we have a radiologist here, so
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's really high quality, ultrasound. Okay, non-radiating, non-ionizing. Okay, and what we said is, hey, we've got to do a device that replaces 3 of the most common, imaging probes in the market: a cardiac probe, an abdominal OBGYN probe, and a small parts and a vascular probe, all into one. So, so it's a single device that fits into your pocket, hooks up to your phone, and does real-time scanning. But we felt that it was important to go way beyond that, because ultimately in the US it's all about billings. It's about enabling people to capture revenue as well. Okay, so we've been working very hard with Epic and Cerner and all of these EHR systems to kind of make it really simple to kind of go from clicking images to documenting it to patient records, okay, within 30 seconds, right? So, so we're kind of, really, we're anxious to kind of show it off to the world.
Yeah. So everyone's journey definitely takes different paths, and I think all of those experiences led you to the point that you were sort of ready, you're prepared, or had the ability to pull all that content forward to make this device that pulls the technology, knowledge, the interest in advancing healthcare in other places, and your experience in running other organizations kind of all kind of came together at one time for this successful venture, right? And so I think one thing we talked to Angelique about a little bit too is sort of starting with a technical background, but then running a company. Like what is that? What are the sort of the lessons learned, or how is your approach? Is your approach to running your company any different as an engineer than it might be from anyone else's point of view? Or
I think clearly previously clearly as an engineer you think, hey, the tech is the most important thing, right? It's your differentiator. But ultimately, it's all about execution. Okay, ideas, you kind of, I see a lot of engineers wanting to kind of, cover their ideas, and I'm like, hey, share them off and to see if others can find flaws in it, right? If you've got good ideas and you can patent it and protect it, share it, okay? And because ultimately, ideas are worthless without nurturing and execution, right? So my feeling is it's all about the team, okay? Everything is about people, okay? And I think that's a fundamental shift in technology first to a people first approach. And, and it's about kind of building your team in a way, okay? I've seen a lot of people make the mistakes of kind of going and hiring like all-star performers, right? Oh, this guy sold this much and is a sales leader, or this person did this. I mean, I've seen lesser teams run circles around teams of all-stars.
Yeah, like on paper they look great, but maybe when you get down to it.
So it's really, I mean, my feeling out here is it boils down to culture, okay? And what do I mean by that, right? I mean, as an entrepreneur, you all want to kind of create these rocket ships. I mean, take moonshots or whatever it is, right? I mean, and yes, I mean, your product and your tech is your spaceship, right? Is your rocket ship. And a lot of people pay attention to kind of building that rocket ship. But you're not going to get there without rocket fuel. Your people, your culture are ultimately your fuel, right? I mean, that's what you need to kind of pay attention to and build, because ultimately it's people who make great products, okay? And I think we spend a lot of time doing market research on usability or, I don't know, I mean, features or whatever else, right? I mean, but when you think about great products have personality, right? I mean, so, and that personality is actually seeps through from the personality of the creators, okay? Because, I mean, creating companies and creating products is ultimately that, it's a culture that kind of puts out great products. So my feeling out here is that was a big thing to kind of learn is thinking about you can actually design your culture, okay? You can actually influence your culture. You can actually influence how you work together, okay? Because you get to set the playing field on how you play, okay, and how you interact with each other, and and how you and the norms, right? I mean, and those norms get set early in a company and get locked, and sometimes get ossified, okay? You can change your, listen, you can change your people, but you can't change culture, right? I mean, I think, forget the name of it was it Peter Drucker who said, I mean, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? I mean, and that's the thing. It's so true, because the two things that actually are really difficult to change in a company are strategy and culture, okay? If you don't pay attention to it, the absence of culture, okay? I mean, there's no absence of culture, okay? Is probably kind of a bad culture. So I think that's kind of, the biggest learning that I can talk about.
So similarly, if you look at the EXO website, you'll see that there's a quote that says that you're part of an unreasonable team. So I was like, what does that mean? That seems like a strange way to characterize it. But then you referenced there's a George Bernard Shaw quote, which I'll just read to you. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. So I don't know if you want to comment some more on that.
No, I absolutely. I mean, you have to be unreasonable, right? I mean, because, listen, I mean, startups are very fragile, delicate things, okay? I mean, in a lot of startups, I mean, the mortality rate on startups is astronomically high, right? I mean, but the key thing is that, and a lot of people will say, what a dumb effing idea what you're working on is, right? I mean,
Angelique's nodding.
Okay, I mean, it probably is, okay? I mean, at a particular, but it all depends on perspective, right? Everything depends on perspective, and and your job as an entrepreneur is to kind of, not live in the present and design products for the present, because there is a gestation time before your product actually comes out into the market, okay? And it needs to be, you need to design something that is actually future perfect, okay? And to be able to do that is incredibly tough and requires a significant amount of unreasonableness and a viewpoint that it will change the world, okay? Or it will have an impact on the world, okay? And you have to set really high bars, okay, within the organization, because especially in medicine, right? I mean, and in the medical field, it's what you will end up doing is a big part of your job is actually evangelism. Okay, you're evangelizing a future into the future, and so this is about it, and especially when you're kind of pioneering new technologies and new kinds of products, you have to kind of be unreasonable that that what you're developing and what you're going to do is going to have an impact over time, and you've got to persist. Okay, and the key phrase out there is persistence, to make the unreasonable realistic and kind of part of everyday life. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think that's my viewpoint.
Yeah, and so that culture obviously is very important, based on what you just said, but there's also the underlying need for particular skill sets to get the work done. So how do you balance that, and maybe also what kind of skills do you think are important to hire versus to rent or to outsource?
Sure. I mean, I think that's a great question, because you can't do everything within a startup, and you can't. I mean, and it's a multi-layered question too. So it may take a little long to respond. So if people are interested, so I think the short answer is clearly figure out where the core value is. Okay, in your invention or your products or whatever you're building. And really kind of make sure you've got the subject matter experts in there, right? I mean, and also figure out what is not core currently, okay? Because doing a startup is like playing a video game, okay? You've got to kind of, before you take on the big boss in the final level, you've got to kind of, conquer, the little challenges along the way, right? You got to kind of finish your seed round financing, your Series A, your Series B, your Series C, and whatever, okay? So think about and set yourself those goals in terms of what you're going to do and what is core to the mission at that particular point in time, right? I mean, so I think, in your initial phases, it's kind of, the technology risk is huge. Okay, so you say, hey, I'm going to retire the technology risk up to this point. Okay, then the next thing is the next risk, and then there's regulatory risk. So think about this and chunkify your problem and figure out at every point what is core, and work with people that you can then fold in once you raise the next round of financing. Okay, and say, hey, here's a small team that's hungry that I'm working with. Okay, because initially we were like, hey, we're going to focus on the hardware because nothing's going to happen. But we quickly figured out having all the interconnectivity in the world is super important as well, and that could be hugely differentiated. So we started working with teams that we could actually fold in or tuck in as we grew, right? So think about it in those terms. But I think in terms of hiring people, I think, ultimately, I would always say, okay, don't hire based on resume. Hire based on cultural fit, okay? So what do I mean by that? It's because key leaders will set the culture very early, okay? And we kind of, in medical devices, especially in medicine in general, you'll see, again, we have culturally, we kind of, styled ourselves more on the Silicon Valley side of things, okay, and rather than kind of a traditional med device kind of a culture. We were kind of, very explicit about that in terms of, there were great people we could have gone and hired early on from, say, a General Electric or a Siemens or, but these are all, you have to realize the culture out there these are all industrial age companies, right? These are 150-year-old companies where the culture is pretty ossified, okay, in terms of how they operate. So we wanted to kind of, say, hey, that was something that we specifically said on what we're going to watch out for. But at the same point, you hire not based on experience, but thirst for experience, right? I mean, as somebody said, if experience mattered, then the stones of London would be considered philosophers. Right? So you want people who want to kind of, who have that thirst for doing something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then how do you layer in, we were talking before, the technical advisory group, and you also mentioned how sometimes they help you make those networks and connections, down the road as well. So how do you think about your technical advisory team?
Really, I see your technical advisory board as an amplifier, right? As an entrepreneur, you have your network on the kind of people you will naturally connect to, right? But you will need people in other areas that you don't have ins in, okay? A good way is finding top people in those areas and bringing them on, okay, for equity, okay, and not cash, equity, okay, for access to their networks, okay, because now you have 4 or 5, really great advisory board members, okay. You've now increased the breadth of your network 4 times or 5 times, okay, and each of those, but remember, networks, okay, network effects are, n square, right? So if you have 5 more people, okay, in there, your net aggregate kind of goes up significantly more, okay, because think of it as really creating circles of trust, okay, because they have people that they trust, and the way you measure how your advisory board is doing is who are they bringing in and saying, are they excited about what you're doing, and say, hey, go meet this person, talk to this, So we kind of, one of the things is it's hard to break into some of these networks, okay, and that's a great way of doing it.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask too, because if they're a one person company where they're trying to find the experts in the space, or they're trying to make those connections, do you have any advice on how to find the right people?
I think, really, that initial core of 4 or 5 people is super important.
Yeah.
It wouldn't do, I think finding that initial team, either that needs to be people who trust people. It needs to be based completely on trust, okay? Trust and competency. So I think, network on there. That's the only way, and your ideas need to kind of sell themselves. And with my co-founders and my founding team, it was like, we can complete our sentences now, literally.
Yeah.
Okay, so because you will be spending a huge amount of time with these people, okay? So you'll probably be spending more time with some of these people than your family.
Yeah.
Okay, so, it's, remember that.
I think one of the other things we wanted to talk about was kind of the business of running the business, right? And your role of CEO, and how your responsibilities maybe have changed over time as sort of the engineer CEO, and now running the company with a bigger team. Your roles and responsibilities, I think, have shifted a bit, and one of the lenses that I thought would be interesting to talk about is your relationship with investors, and what does that look like? How do you manage that, and how, what's your job, so to speak?
Listen, I think people will tell you as a CEO that a third of your time should be on your board, a third of your time should be on your team, a third of your time is going to be with customers. I don't know anybody who can ever balance that,
yeah.
right? That's ideal, okay? And a key part of what you end up doing is things go in cycles, okay? There's going to be times where you're going to be 100% focused on fundraising, as an example, okay? And listen, as CEO, your number one job is to keep the lights on, okay? And that's it, right? I mean, that's the only job, I would argue, okay, is to keep lights on and to bring in amazing talent, okay? To keep lights on, to bring in amazing talent, to build amazing, who will then build amazing products. So it's not about you kind of building the product. But at the same time, right, I mean, it's when you start growing the company, capital is absolutely, you need to bring in capital. And especially for what we're doing, I mean, is really, I mean, we needed to bring in quite a bit of capital, okay? So we've raised about a little north of $300 million to date, okay, into the company. So, and the interesting thing is now, I mean, managing the board and managing expectations, okay, because and the key thing to remember as you grow is, as a CEO, the board works for you. You don't work for the board. The board works for you, okay? Your role as a CEO is not about reporting out to the board, okay? Yes, you will report out to the board, okay? But a big part of it is actually, if you can actually start co-creating with people who work for the company, okay? The board works for the company. Remember that. And so figure out how you're actually going to harness the power of the board and the board observers. How are you going to get guidance from your board, okay? A big part of my role is actually now aligning strategy, okay, across the board, across the leadership team, and across the company, right? And that's a key thing, I think entrepreneurs forget is how do you actually put the board to work, okay? So that's been kind of a bit of a learning curve, okay, in terms of remembering that, okay? I mean, it is strange, yes, investors put in money to come and work for the company.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I think the other piece of it too is that you have a number of investors, but they're not all on the board, right? And so kind of balancing those external interests, right? And, you have to say no to some of them to kind of get involved, right?
Sure. I mean, I think, we do have, board. I mean, one of the things that we've never shied away from is while we've tried to keep the board itself small, I think it's important early days to keep a very, very small board, okay? You don't want to be spending a lot of time aligning people. You've got a hard enough job running the company, okay? But, in terms of board advisors as well, I mean, we kind of really look at those as networks we can leverage, okay? And advice we can leverage. So one of the things that we've done in the past is kind of do offsites, okay, with board and board advisors where we can talk about strategy, we can talk about and never forget the importance of a good board dinner, okay? If you can orchestrate that well, you can actually there is a lot that can get done, okay, rather than kind of chit-chatting.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, they have that communication open. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. So then, kind of to related to that, like how you communicate with your board or even how you communicate about your product, one thing we've been working on this week is creating a strategy, right? And we've been working through sort of SWOT analyses and like what are the issues and advantages that we're trying to take care of. And so how do you think about sort of the strategy work that you do with your team, and then what bits of that strategy gets communicated out, or how do you leverage your organizational strategy, which will lead to kind of my next question, which is about that commercial readiness and sort of having that commercially flexible team.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, I think, strategy needs to be tested, okay, like anything else. So, like everything else, I mean, what are those tiny bits of the strategy that you can put to test early, right? And because strategy needs to be super simple, okay? If you can't communicate it easily, forget it, okay? It just needs to be super simple, okay, in terms of what you're doing. But the key thing for us is kind of, I mean, make sure that what you're doing is not necessarily incremental, right? I mean, it needs to be kind of, I mean, it's 1 foot today, 1 foot into the future in terms of how you kind of look at it. But strategy does not necessarily be about products or technology. Strategy can be kind of, I mean, choosing markets to enter or not enter, okay? And I think market strategy and go-to-market is such an important part of what you're going to do. So what are those early tests that you can do to get validation, okay? I mean, could you create a simple mock, okay? I mean, sometimes, listen, the key thing that I can tell you is it's not the user's job or the customer's job, okay, to understand what this product's supposed to look like. That's your job, right? I mean, you just can't go and ask people if they want it.
Yep.
Because that's not their job. Okay?
Yeah, we talked about a little bit of that in the context of training. It's like, well, we'll have to train them to use it. Well, if there's more that you can do on the development side, so there's less training or less, educational component, they can figure it out when they open the box, right? Because you want to be able to open the box and know how to use it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think then that's one of the things where creating a future perfect product. What are the technologies that are going to be relevant at that particular point, right? I mean, listen, I mean, if you were kind of in the software world, okay, in pre-iPhone days, I mean, you're dependent on downloading a piece of an installer and installing it and kind of, I mean, and DLLs and whatever else, I mean, you need to plug in to kind of get stuff to work, right?
Yeah.
Now you live in a world where my mom knows how to kind of, I mean, it just updates by itself, right? I mean, it's like
she might not know how to do it, but it
but,
does it.
Yeah, it does it, right? I mean, so again, I mean, so it's and you've got to kind of, I mean, think about what are those relevant things in terms of vectors that you can bet on, okay, in 2 years from now. I mean, how is the world going to look, okay?
Yeah, and so as you're, kind of getting hopefully your supply and your clearances ready and sort of moving towards a commercial phase, like what are the key things that are important to keep in mind, or the capabilities you want to build in your team or that commercial stance that you wanted to take?
Yeah, no, I think that's where, I mean, as we kind of starting to build out the commercial team, I mean, I was like, hey, what are the market tests that are actually, you think of it, everything that you do, 2 ways, okay? What is it that's actually going to give you confidence that you're doing the right things? And what is it that's actually going to give your investors confidence that you're doing the right things? Those are actually slightly different, right? But if you can actually align them, okay, it has a multiplier effect, right? I mean, when we kind of said, hey, we were kind of ready to kind of show this off, I said, hey, let's go and show off the what we are doing and at that point, I mean, I said, hey, met the guy who was running GE's global ultrasound, right? I mean, said, hey, Andy, want to come and take a sneak peek? Okay. So yeah, we had him over, we took a sneak peek, and I mean, a month later, he was part of our team.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so, but that's a great market test, right?
Right.
I mean, in terms of where this is going, okay? And again, I mean, people bring in great people, okay? I mean, it's like, I mean, it's like, kind of look at, I mean, using a Beatles analogy, right? I mean, John brought in, John brought in George, George knew Paul, I mean, and then, knew other folks, and kind of, I mean, it grows, right? I mean, and from that circle of trust. So, I mean, that's what, so think about those market tests as you kind of go and see who you can pull, because those are great indicators on your ability to sell the value proposition. Okay, and I remember kind of, I mean, sometimes it's the board, right? I mean, that's kind of, I mean, makes introductions, or you kind of, I mean, start having conversations that lead to other conversations, and I think, your ability to attract talent, okay, or other organizations, I mean, into your reality distortion field, okay, of the company is super important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have one last question, unless you guys have another question you wanted to drop in. Like, have you had to shift your thinking at all? Thinking about, I got to develop the best product and this future forward product versus now I got to get out in the market and sell it. Like that technical brain side versus a commercial, push.
No, I mean, I think you've got to kind of have, I mean, listen, I mean, you've got to be able to do a little bit of both, right? I mean, because it's ultimately, listen, I mean, product people focus in kind of, I mean, building really great product, okay? And it actually becomes a disincentive. You stop them from building amazing stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
But at the same point, you give yourself, time to saying, hey, we want to build the best product, okay, at this particular point in time, right? Because, again, in medicine, it's a little different, okay, wherein the technology rejection rate is pretty large, okay? I mean, in terms of compared to other fields, right? I mean, in Silicon Valley is a little bit about move fast, break things, okay? And that doesn't quite work in what we're doing.
Yeah.
But at the same point, I mean, you want to kind of, I mean, launch a killer product. I mean, my marketing team advises me not to use the word killer product with medical devices.
Right, yep. Yeah, probably prudent.
But no, I mean, I think, it's, in terms of the commercial side of things, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's left and right brain. Okay, it has to be commercially viable, but it's also got to be stuff that generates word of mouth very quickly. So customer satisfaction is super important. So mapping out the entire customer journey, okay, and saying what are all the touch points, okay, that the user is going to go through, and where, because I mean, you see people using product, right? I mean, there's going to be clear pain points that kind of show up where it's like, geez, they're happy, frustrated, this, that. Map out that mood as people use current products, because that tells you little places where you can actually delight them, okay? I mean, because, those are the things, I mean, those are little things that delight people that they kind of say, gee, that's the personality behind the product.
Right.
Is delight.
Well, I think that's our time today. So thank you very much for
Thanks,
for
Ilsa,
coming.
for
I really
having me.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Happy to.